So how do you really build a stronger economy for the long haul? Is the secret to just slash taxes and let the free market run wild? Or should the government step in and make smart investments? We're going to break down the two main toolkits governments have to try and answer that very question. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to get clear on what supply side even means. Then we'll dive into the two competing toolkits. After that, we'll look at the promises and the perils. We'll see how it all plays out in the real world, and we'll finish up with the ultimate trade-off that's at the heart of this whole debate. And really, this is the question at the heart of it all. It's a clash between two really powerful and very different ideas. One says the best thing the government can do is just get out of the way. The other says no, the government has to step in and build the foundation for growth itself. All right, first things first. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly is supply-side policy? The key thing to remember is that this is all about playing the long game. So what does that actually mean? Look, it's not about just giving people more money to spend tomorrow. It's about upgrading the entire engine of the economy, the skills of its workers, the quality of its machines and technology, its natural resources, and the big ideas of its entrepreneurs. The goal is to make the whole system better so it can produce more efficiently for years and years to come. And this is a really important distinction to make. You've probably heard a lot about demand-side policies, things like stimulus checks, right? That's all about boosting spending, or aggregate demand, in the short term. Supply-side policy is the complete opposite. It's focused on the long run, trying to increase the economy's total potential to produce stuff, what economists call the long-run aggregate supply. This really gets to the heart of the matter. The metaphor here is perfect. Think of an economy like a car that has a top speed, a speed limit. If you push it too hard, it overheats with inflation. The whole point of supply-side policy is to actually upgrade the engine, to raise that speed limit so the economy can grow faster, sustainably, without everything blowing up. Okay, so if we want to raise that speed limit, how do we do it? Well, this is where things get interesting and a little contentious. There are two very different approaches, each with its own philosophy about how the economy really works. So you've basically got two camps, right? In one corner, you have the market-based approach. The philosophy is super simple. The free market knows best, so the government should just get out of the way. In the other corner, you have the interventionist view. This one argues that markets are great, but they're not perfect. They fail. And when they do, the government has to step in. So let's pop the hood on that first toolkit. The market-based approach is all about one thing: incentives. The logic goes like this. You cut taxes, people and companies have more incentive to work and invest. You get rid of regulations, you lower costs and spark competition. You privatize state-run companies, and the profit motive is supposed to make them more efficient. It's all about unleashing the private sector. Now, toolkit number two, it's a totally different story. Here, the government isn't getting out of the way, it's rolling up its sleeves and getting to work. It invests directly in people with better schools and healthcare. It builds the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the high-speed internet that businesses need to thrive. And it funds the risky, long-term research that the private sector might not touch. The goal here is to fill in the gaps the market leaves behind. All right, so we've got these two very different toolkits on the table. In theory, they sound pretty good, right? But what happens when they hit the real world? This is where it gets messy, and where we have to talk about the hidden costs and the real-world consequences. And this really lays out the fundamental problem. There's no free lunch here. The big promise is always this idea of sustainable growth. But the risk, the peril, is that the benefits of that growth don't get shared by everyone. It might come at the expense of job security, or even worse, at the expense of the environment. Every single choice has a trade-off. Okay, let's talk about the first big roadblock: time. And this is a huge one. These policies are just slow, and they can be really expensive. Think about it. If you invest in building new schools today, you might not see the economic payoff from that better educated workforce for a decade, maybe even longer. That's a really tough sell for a politician who's up for re-election in 2 years. And then you've got this really thorny issue of inequality, especially with those market-based tools. The idea is that tax cuts for corporations will trickle down, but that doesn't always happen. And when you hear about making labor markets more flexible, that can often just be a nice way of saying less job security and lower wages for some workers, which can end up making the gap between the rich and poor even wider. Finally, let's not forget the planet. When the main goal is just cutting costs for businesses, environmental regulations are often the first thing on the chopping block. And this can create what economists call negative externalities. Basically, the public pays the price for private profits through things like polluted rivers or clear-cut forests. All right, enough with the theory. Let's see how this stuff actually plays out on the ground. We're going to look at 4 real-world examples that show just how messy and how mixed the results can be. First up, let's head to the UK back in the 1980s. The Thatcher reforms were basically a textbook example of the market-based approach. And did it work? Well, kind of. Productivity went up, for sure, but the social cost was enormous. Whole industries were wiped out, leading to massive job losses and a huge spike in inequality. It was a classic and pretty brutal trade-off.
Okay, now let's flip the script completely and look at Germany. Their dual education system is a perfect example of successful interventionism in action. The government and private companies work together to create this amazing system of apprenticeships. And the results? They speak for themselves. A super skilled workforce, a powerful manufacturing sector, and one of the lowest rates of youth unemployment on the planet.
How about a more recent example? The 2017 tax cuts in the US were a massive real-world test of that market-based idea that cutting taxes for corporations would unleash a tidal wave of investment and growth. And the reality? Well, there was a small temporary bump in GDP, but it came with a massive increase in government debt, and studies have found very little evidence of a lasting long-term impact on growth. And for our last case, we have a really sobering story from Indonesia. In an effort to attract more foreign investment, the government passed this huge law that essentially rolled back key environmental protections. The goal was more growth. The result? Devastating deforestation and fires, much of it linked directly to clearing land for industries like palm oil. It's a stark reminder of those environmental perils we were just talking about. So after looking at the theory, the trade-offs, and the real-world results, what's the bottom line? Which toolkit is the winner?
Well, here's the thing. The real takeaway isn't that one is good and the other is bad. It's not really market versus government. The real choice is about what kind of economy we want to build, and, just as importantly, what trade-offs we're willing to live with to get there. It's a question of values.
And when you look at the most successful long-term strategies, you start to see a pattern. They don't just stick to one playbook. The smartest approaches often mix and match, using market incentives to drive competition in one sector while making huge public investments in things like education or green technology. It's about using the right tool for the right job. So, I'm going to leave you with this thought. The next time you hear a politician or an expert roll out some big plan for the economy, pause for a second. Instead of just asking, will this grow the economy, try asking 3 much better questions. Who benefits from this? Who pays the price? And when will we actually know if it worked?